The Xylith arena buzzed with excitement as Vornar stood tall in the center, his eyes gleaming with contempt for the human soldiers that dared challenge him. The crowd roared with approval as the last of his defeated challengers was carried out of the ring, their bodies broken from the aliens' relentless assault. Vornar's reputation as the greatest duelist in the galaxy was undeniable. No one could withstand the might of his blade. No species could match his speed or strength. He was an unstoppable force in a world where only the strongest survived. But today something was different. A human had entered the arena, and the crowd watched as Jace Walker stepped forward, his dark hair slightly matted from travel, his eyes steely with resolve. The human didn't look like much a simple soldier from a small planet called Earth. He wore no enhancements, no sleek armor, just a dull sword at his side. But what he lacked in technology and grace, he made up for with an unyielding stare that burned through the mocking laughter of the crowd. Vornar laughed louder, sensing the human's uncertainty, but the human didn't back down. Instead, he raised his chin slightly and stepped into the ring. Walker didn't speak a word, not a single sentence of bravado, not a hint of fear. He simply met the alien's gaze and prepared his blade. No one could understand why a human would challenge someone like Vornar. The alien was more powerful, faster than anything Walker could ever hope to match, yet there was something in the soldier's posture that told the crowd this wouldn't be a fight they had seen before. Vornar grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the artificial lights above, and without a word he lunged forward, his massive frame moving with a deadly speed that sent shockwaves through the air. His blade came down in a series of rapid strikes. But Walker stood his ground. He raised his sword just in time to block the first blow, and the force of the impact almost threw him off balance. But the human gritted his teeth and steadied himself for the next strike. The crowd was on edge, expecting the human to crumble under the pressure. But Walker held firm, his sword trembling slightly in his grip as the alien's strength collided with him again and again. Vornar's attacks were relentless, each strike coming faster, more brutal than the last. But the human did not flinch, he did not fall, and he did not yield. Every muscle in Walker's body screamed in protest as he deflected another blow. The pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the pain of watching humanity suffer back on Earth. He had fought countless battles against overwhelming odds, but never had he faced something like this. Yet something deep inside him refused to give in. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a fight to prove that even in the face of a galaxy full of superior beings, humanity could carve its place with nothing more than their will to live. As the battle raged on, Walker's movements became more fluid, his blade finding its rhythm amidst the chaos of the alien's relentless onslaught. With each strike, he learned the alien's tactics, the rhythm of his attacks, the weaknesses beneath the alien's brute force, and slowly, very slowly, he began to adapt to the pace of the fight. Vornar's laughter continued as he slashed again and again, but beneath the mocking sounds, there was something new, a crack in his confidence. Something was shifting. And for the first time since the beginning of the duel, the alien began to hesitate, just slightly unsure of the human standing before him. The crowd shifted uneasily as the battle wore on, and Walker's resistance became more than just desperation. It was defiance. It was a challenge to the alien's invincibility. The air thickened with tension as the human continued to deflect each attack, not perfectly, but with growing precision. The crowd had expected the human to fall by now, to be nothing more than a brief distraction, but instead they saw something they hadn't anticipated, a warrior who refused to back down. Vornar's eyes narrowed as he watched Walker move his body slightly more than just an animal instinct. There was something else, something that told the alien he wasn't facing a mere weakling of the lower species anymore. The human's mind was sharp, his decisions becoming more calculated with each passing second. Vornar couldn't help but feel a strange unease building within him. At first, he thought it was nothing, but as the fight dragged on, he realized that the human was learning his patterns, studying his every movement and adapting. Vornar had never faced an opponent who could do that, who could survive the brutality of his attacks long enough to change the tide of the fight. His arrogance had blinded him to this possibility. He had assumed the human would tire out, the human would break. But instead there was something in his eyes, something fierce, something human that refused to die. Walker felt the sweat trickle down his forehead, his muscles screaming with every strike. He blocked the alien's blade coming at him with deadly force, but he held his ground. He knew he couldn't match Vorner's speed or strength, so he didn't try. Instead, he did the one thing Vorner had never expected. He used his opponent's arrogance against him. With every clash of their swords, Walker's resolve solidified. He saw the pattern in Vorner's strikes. The alien was faster, yes, but his attacks had a rhythm, a cadence to them, each one flowing into the next in a predictable sequence. It was subtle, but it was there, and it was enough for Walker to begin to anticipate the next move before it came. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was learning how to fight back. Vorner's strikes grew more erratic as the human began to anticipate his every move. The alien's confidence began to crack. The blows that had once been unstoppable now met resistance that slowed them down. Walker's blade pressed harder against the aliens with each deflection, the sound of clashing steel echoing across the arena like a war drum. The crowd was silent now, their eyes fixed on the human in the ring with Vorner, no longer mocking the human's resolve, but watching with something akin to awe as Walker's blade sang through the air, moving faster with each step, the alien's attacks slowing just slightly, his breathing becoming heavier as the realization dawned on him that this human was no longer a mere soldier from a backwater planet. He was a threat. Vorner's eyes flashed with fury. He launched another barrage of strikes, this time faster, more brutal, but it didn't matter. Walker was ready. He met each attack with unshakable calm, his sword moving with precision and purpose, his focus unbroken. And then it happened. For the first time in the fight, Vorner missed his strike by an inch, the alien's blade slicing through air instead of human flesh. Walker saw the opening in an instant, and he reacted faster than he ever had before, his sword cutting through the space between them as he countered the alien's overextended movement. Vorner staggered back in shock. The crowd gasped in disbelief. The moment had come. The human had finally forced the first mistake from the galaxy's greatest duelist. Vorner's eyes widened as he stumbled back, the realization hitting him with the force of 1,000 blows. The human had done it. The impossible had happened for the first time in the duel. Vorner's arrogance had been his undoing. The alien's blade had missed its mark by mere inches, but that small mistake was enough to shift the momentum. The crowd could barely believe what they were seeing. Their disbelief echoed in the deafening silence that followed. Walker didn't hesitate. His mind didn't waver. He pressed forward with a speed and precision that surprised even him. The energy coursing through his body was pure adrenaline. His instincts had taken over, and now there was no stopping him. Vorner had been caught off guard, but Walker wasn't about to let the alien recover. He knew this was his moment. This was the chance he had fought for. The alien roared in frustration, his monstrous frame surging forward as he lashed out with a renewed fury, his strikes faster, more powerful than before. But Walker was ready. He saw the difference in the alien's attacks. There was a desperation in them now, a crack in Vorner's once perfect technique, and Walker capitalized on it. The human's blade was a blur as it danced in his hands, meeting each of the alien's brutal attacks with calm precision. Vorner growled with rage, every strike more furious than the last, but the doubt had settled in his mind, and doubt was something he had never faced before in his entire career as a duelist. No opponent had ever pushed him this far, and now he was beginning to feel it creeping in, the pressure mounting with every blocked strike, every failed attempt to land a decisive blow. His confidence crumbled piece by piece as the human grew bolder with each passing second. Walker could feel the shift in the fight. He could see it in the way the alien moved. The arrogance had disappeared, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But he couldn't let up, not for a second. He had to keep pressing forward. He couldn't let the alien regain control of the battle. His sword moved with deadly purpose. Every strike he made was calculated, aimed to disrupt Vorner's rhythm, to break the alien's composure. The crowd was on the edge of their seats now, the tension in the arena palpable as they watched Walker and Vorner clash again and again, the sheer power of the alien's blows reverberating through the air. But each time Walker met them with unwavering resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something greater, something that burned inside him, something that made the pain worth it, made the struggle bearable. Vorner was beginning to tire, the sweat beading on his brow, his movements slowing as the fight dragged on, the weight of his own arrogance finally catching up with him. He had underestimated this human, this soldier, who had refused to break under the pressure, this human who was now pushing him to the edge of his limits and beyond. Walker didn't let up. He could see the alien weakening, and with every moment that passed his confidence grew. It was a subtle thing at first, a small shift in his stance, a tightening of his grip on his blade, but it was enough to make all the difference. He had Vorner on the ropes now, and there was no turning back. With one final decisive move, Walker lunged forward with all the power he could muster, his sword slashing through the air in a perfect arc, aiming directly for the alien's exposed side, a calculated strike that would end the duel once and for all. The arena seemed to freeze in that moment as Walker's sword cut through the air. It was a perfect strike, everything he had learned up until now, every move, every lesson in survival, converging into this one moment. Vorner's eyes widened in disbelief as the human's blade arced toward him. His own weapon was too slow to stop it. The alien's body was already strained from the constant battle. The crack in his defenses was too wide to ignore. Time seemed to slow as the sword neared its target. Vorner's heart pounded in his chest. His alien instincts screamed at him to move, to block, to do something, but his body was betraying him. The fatigue from the relentless fight had taken its toll, and for the first time he felt the pressure of Walker's unyielding will bearing down on him. But just as the blade was about to connect, Vorner's hand shot out in a desperate attempt to catch the strike. His fingers brushed the steel, and for a split second he thought he had stopped it. He thought he had won, but the force behind Walker's strike was too much. The alien's hand slipped, and in that instant the blade connected with his side. Vorner's body jerked back with the impact. Pain shot through him, a sharp burst that took his breath away. The crowd gasped as the alien stumbled back, his usually indomitable stance faltering for the first time in the duel. Vorner was showing vulnerability. Blood began to seep from the wound, a stark contrast against his blackened skin, and his eyes burned with something that wasn't just rage but confusion. Walker didn't pause. He didn't hesitate. The moment Vorner staggered back, he surged forward with renewed determination, his blade moving faster now with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. The alien's deflection was slower now, weaker than before, and with each failed attempt to defend himself, Walker pressed harder, each strike pushing Vorner further back into the ring. The alien's breath grew ragged as Walker's relentless assault took its toll. Vorner tried to fight back, but his movements were sluggish, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind clouded by frustration. The crowd was silent in awe. They had never seen a duel like this before. No one had ever seen a human stand toe-to-toe with an alien of Vorner's caliber and survive. Vorner's pride was beginning to crack. The realization that the human was not just fighting for his life, but for something deeper, something far more dangerous than just victory, was eating at him. Walker wasn't just a soldier. He was the embodiment of humanity's greatest strength, an unstoppable will to survive, to push forward when the odds were impossible. And as the alien tried to retaliate with a wild overhead strike, Walker moved with the fluidity of a seasoned fighter, his footwork perfect as he sidestepped the blow and countered with a quick jab to Vorner's ribs. The alien grunted in pain as the strike landed with precision, and the crowd roared with approval at the unexpected turn of events. Vorner's knees buckled for a brief moment, his immense frame staggering under the weight of the human's attack. The alien's pride shattered, the cracks in his confidence widening with every blow. He could no longer deny it. He was being overpowered by a human, a creature he had dismissed from the start as weak and insignificant. Walker stood tall in front of the alien, his blade held steady, his breath coming in shallow bursts, but his resolve unbroken. He could feel the finish line ahead of him. He could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and this time there would be no stopping him. The duel had shifted entirely in his favor, and he wasn't about to let it slip away now. Vorner's chest heaved with frustration as his back hit the arena floor. The harsh reality setting in. The human had not only survived the impossible, but had risen above it, and now the alien was on the verge of defeat, something he never thought would happen to him. Vorner's body hit the ground with a heavy thud, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath, as the realization settled over him like a weight so crushing it left him unable to move for a moment. The arena was deathly quiet, the crowd unsure whether they had just witnessed a shift in fate or the final moments of a brutal battle, the alien had fallen for the first time since the duel began. His invulnerability had been shattered, and now he was struggling to rise. Walker stood over him, his sword held low but ready, his chest heaving with exhaustion as he tried to steady his breathing. But his eyes never left Vorner, not for a second. He had the alien where he wanted him, but the victory was not yet won. The battle was not yet over. He knew that one mistake could turn the tide, and he couldn't afford to make it. Vorner's eyes flickered with rage and disbelief, his pride bleeding out as he struggled to push himself up from the ground, his massive hands pressed against the arena floor, his body shaking with effort. The alien had never been in this position before. He had never been so close to losing, so close to being defeated by a human of all beings, and the reality of it gnawed at his insides. The crowd was tense, watching in stunned silence as the alien tried to rise, the once unshakable champion, now faced with his greatest defeat. His body was weakened by the constant strain of the duel, his alien physiology not immune to the toll the battle had taken on him, and Walker knew this was his moment. He could see the cracks in Vorner's defenses. He could feel the end of the fight within his grasp. But as Vorner staggered to his feet, his monstrous frame towering over Walker, once more there was something different in the alien's eyes. The rage was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, something darker, something that made Walker's heart race with caution. Vorner was not done yet. Despite the obvious fatigue, despite the wounds that had begun to stain his blackened skin, the alien was still fighting to hold on to his pride, to his reputation, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Vorner's roar echoed across the arena as he surged forward with a primal force, his blade swinging in an arc that seemed to cut through the very air. The sudden onslaught caught Walker off guard, and the human barely had time to raise his sword in defense before Vorner's massive frame crashed into him with all the force of a collapsing star. The impact sent Walker stumbling back, his feet slipping on the arena floor as Vorner pressed his attack, his sword a blur of motion as it came down on the human again and again, each strike carrying the weight of 1,000 years of alien pride. The alien was no longer trying to win, he was trying to make Walker suffer, trying to break him mentally and physically. But Walker didn't flinch, he didn't fall, not this time. He had tasted victory once, and now there was nothing that could stop him. He sidestepped a brutal strike, his body moving on instinct, his sword meeting Vorner's in a clash of steel that rang out like thunder across the arena. The alien's attacks were powerful, but they were growing sloppier, more desperate as fatigue began to take its toll. For a split second, Walker saw the alien's weakness fully exposed. The pride that had fueled Vorner's relentless aggression was fading, now replaced by a growing fear, the realization that he might actually lose this fight, the fear of being overpowered by a human, a species he had once laughed at, a species that he had underestimated at every turn. Walker didn't waste the opportunity. With one quick motion, he dodged a final strike from the alien and spun around to face him, his sword cutting through the air. Once more, this time with a surety that could not be denied. This was his moment to end it all, to finish the fight once and for all. The arena held its breath as Walker's sword sliced through the air, his movements sharp and precise. As the alien staggered back, his massive form now slowing each breath, labored with exhaustion. Vorner's eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disbelief. His pride had been shattered, his body broken, but he refused to acknowledge the inevitable. His hand gripped his blade tighter, and for a moment the arena seemed to grow still, as though time had frozen between them. Walker stood steady, his chest heaving, but his focus razor sharp. The fight had turned in his favor, but he knew better than to believe it was over. Not yet. The alien still had fight left in him, the same fight that had made him the champion of the galaxy. But now that fire was dimming, and Walker could see it in the alien's eyes. The pride was still there, but it was fraying. The cracks were deepening with every strike that missed, with every breath that came slower than the last. Vorner's roar shattered the silence as he lunged forward, once more, his movements slower than before, his strikes now filled with desperation, his body heavy with the weight of the battle, but his mind locked onto one thing: revenge. His blade came down in a wide arc, aiming for Walker's head with a speed born of pure instinct, but even that was no match for the human's newfound confidence. With a calmness that defied the chaos of the battle, Walker sidestepped the alien's strike, his feet gliding across the floor. with precision, his sword flicking up to meet Vorner's with a sharp clash that sent shockwaves through the arena. The alien's blade was pushed aside with ease, and before Vorner could recover, Walker was already there, his blade biting into the alien's side once more. The crowd erupted into a frenzy as they watched the alien stumble back in shock, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his strength waning as Walker pressed forward, his attacks now swift and unrelenting, each strike landing true with a sharpness that echoed across the arena. Vorner's once impenetrable defenses had crumbled under the weight of the human's persistence, and now it was clear to everyone that the alien was no longer the invincible champion he had once been. Vorner tried to retaliate, but his movements were sluggish, his reactions delayed as the human closed the distance between them, his blade never faltering his strikes, never slowing each one, a calculated effort to push the alien to the edge of defeat, and with every swing the alien's confidence shattered further and further. For the first time since the beginning of the duel, Vorner hesitated, his massive form shifting uneasily as Walker's blade pressed against him again and again, his once immense strength no match for the human's relentless focus and determination. It was in that hesitation that the final blow was forged as Walker closed in for the kill, his sword, a blur of motion cutting through the air in a perfect arc aimed at the alien's vulnerable throat. Vorner's eyes widened with horror as he realized there was no escaping it. The human had found his opening, and in that instant all of his pride, all of his power, meant nothing before the relentless will of the human warrior. Before him, the final strike came faster than the alien could react. The blade sliced through the air, and Vorner's roar of defiance was cut short as his massive body crumpled to the ground, the sound of steel meeting flesh resonating throughout the arena with a deafening finality. The champion of the galaxy had been defeated by a human, a creature once thought to be weak and insignificant. Walker stood over the fallen alien, breathing heavily, his sword still raised, his heart pounding in his chest, but his eyes cold with the knowledge that he had won this fight not through strength, but through sheer will, through the understanding that no matter how powerful the enemy, a human could endure. The crowd was silent for a moment, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed, and then the roar of applause erupted as the reality of the victory set in. The impossible had been done. A human had defeated the greatest duelist the galaxy had ever known. The silence that followed was deafening as Walker stood over Vorner's fallen form, his chest rising and falling with the intensity of the battle. The arena was still, the alien's massive body sprawled across the ground, motionless, his blood staining the floor beneath him. The once booming voice of the crowd now hushed in disbelief, the impossibility of what they had just witnessed sinking in. For a long moment no one moved, not even the highest-ranking officials in the stands dared to speak. The sight of the human standing victorious in the center of the arena was one that would be etched into the minds of every spectator, every leader, and every soldier present. The duel that had once seemed like a guaranteed victory for the alien had turned into something entirely different, something they had never expected, a shift in the balance of power, a moment that would change everything. Walker didn't lower his sword, not yet. He stood still, his eyes locked onto the fallen form of Vorner, his breathing slowing, but the weight of the moment heavy upon him. This was not just a victory. It was a statement to every being in the galaxy that humanity could stand alongside the greatest warriors in the universe, that they could not be dismissed, not be overlooked anymore. The alien officials in the stands began to murmur amongst themselves, their once arrogant expressions faltering as they looked at the human who had just defeated the champion of their race, and their whispers only grew louder as the realization began to settle over them that this human soldier had done what no one thought possible. But Walker wasn't done yet. The moment had come for the world to see what humanity was capable of, what they stood for, and what they would fight for. He slowly lowered his sword and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stillness of the arena as he spoke to the fallen alien, the crowd watching in stunned silence as he addressed the duelist who had once been invincible. "You've lost." Walker's voice rang clear, his tone cold but steady. "You're not invincible, and neither are your people." He paused, letting the words sink in and the weight of the message take hold. This fight isn't just about victory, it's about proving that anyone, no matter how small or insignificant they seem to you, can rise up when pushed to the edge. The crowd shifted at his words, some still stunned, others beginning to murmur amongst themselves. But there was no denying the power of Walker's statement. He wasn't just declaring victory over one alien duelist. He was declaring it over the entire galaxy, over the idea that humanity had no place among the stars. Warner's body twitched slightly as though still struggling against the reality of his defeat. But Walker didn't move to finish him off, not yet. This wasn't just about killing the alien. It was about sending a message that would echo through every corner of the galaxy and change everything. The alien officials watched in stunned silence, unable to believe what was happening. But the message was clear. Walker's victory wasn't just a fluke. It was a turning point. Humanity was no longer the underdog, the lesser species, the one to be ignored. They had proven themselves in the most brutal way possible, and now the galaxy would have to reckon with them. As Walker turned to face the crowd, he raised his hand in a slow but deliberate gesture of defiance, his eyes meeting the gaze of the leaders in the stands, daring them to challenge him to question what humanity could accomplish when pushed to the brink. The arena erupted into applause, but this time it was different. It was not the usual cheering for a champion. It was the roar of a galaxy that had just witnessed the birth of something new, something that would change everything. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and Walker had just proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. The sound of applause reverberated throughout the arena as Walker stood at the center, his chest heaving with each breath, his face still a mask of determination. But now there was something else there too, a quiet sense of triumph. He had not only won the duel, but had made a statement that would resonate across the galaxy. His gaze met the alien officials in the stands, and for the first time they did not look down upon him with disdain. They regarded him with something else now, something he had earned respect. Warner's body lay motionless on the ground, but it was not a moment of celebration. Not for Walker. It had never been about the bloodshed or the fight itself. It had always been about something deeper, something more important, proving that humanity had a place in this galaxy, that they could face down their adversaries and not only survive but win. As the applause grew louder, Walker slowly raised his head and turned toward the farthest corner of the arena, where a figure stood watching him, his eyes filled with pride and sorrow. It was his captain, the man who had led the human soldiers into the arena that day, the man who had believed in Walker when no one else did, the man who had seen something in him that had made him the right choice for this impossible mission. Walker's captain had been the one to push him to take this fight, the one to remind him that it wasn't just about surviving. It was about sending a message to the galaxy that humanity was no longer weak, that their strength was not to be underestimated. The captain's face held no emotion, but his eyes shone with something profound. And Walker knew in that moment that he had done more than win a duel. He had changed the course of history. The alien officials began to stir now, some of them still staring at Walker in disbelief, while others exchanged hushed words of concern, their once dominant demeanor faltering as they tried to process the consequences of the humans' victory. This was no longer just about one duel, one champion being bested. This was about power dynamics shifting on a galactic scale, and the implications were staggering. Walker took a step forward and raised his hand once more, not to demand applause, but to acknowledge the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the thousands of spectators who had gathered here today, not just to watch a fight, but to witness the beginning of something new. "We are not your enemies," Walker's voice rang out clear and strong over the silence that had descended on the arena. "We are not here to conquer or destroy, but we are here to be seen, to be heard, to prove that we are worthy of standing beside you as equals, not as lesser beings, but as warriors with our own will, our own strength, our own place in this galaxy." There was a shift in the atmosphere as Walker spoke. The crowd began to stir again, but this time it was different. There was a sense of understanding in the air, a realization that humanity had come into their own. They were no longer the forgotten species they had once been. They were now a force to be reckoned with. As Walker stood there, the applause grew louder still, this time not just a cheer for a victory, but a cheer for the message that had been sent, a cheer for the birth of a new era for humanity. The arena that had once seemed so vast, so impersonal, now felt small, as if the entire galaxy had drawn in to listen to what had just happened. Warner's fall was not just a personal defeat, it was a symbol of something greater. It was the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, and for the galaxy itself. Walker had proven beyond doubt that no matter the odds, no matter the power of the adversary, humanity would stand tall and fight for its place in the stars. And as the arena erupted in cheers, as the lights of the stadium blazed above him, Walker allowed himself a small smile. The fight was over, but the war for humanity's future had only just begun.